Okay, so we will start. Thank you everybody for your interest in this training session and for joining us today, this afternoon. So we are going to start with the first of a series of training workshops being organized by Sharework project. Sharework project is coordinated by Eurecat, and we work towards providing collaborative robotics the necessary intelligence for an effective adoption of human-robot collaboration in industrial shop floors. And this session today will focus mainly on perception. And we are willing to present several perception techniques to increase collaborative robotics knowledge and skills to perceive, comprehend, and reason about the surrounding environment. We will be combining several presentations. If we go to today's agenda, we will be combining several presentations on specific topics ranging from ontological approaches to object detection, human tracking, primitive learning, and how to understand human actions for a better human-robot collaboration. And we'll be combining those theoretical concepts together with small surveys that we will be launching in between presentations, in which we will be testing some key concepts that will be presented in the following minutes. And after that, we will also try to put as much as possible examples from the project to make sure that we can see some applications of these concepts today. If we go to the next slide, I will be able to present a little bit who is going to accompany us today, this afternoon. So I'm taking the role today as the moderator. My name is Marina Presas. I'm from Eurecat's communication department, and I'm substituting Simona Neri, who unfortunately couldn't join. She's the Sharework project coordinator. And today with us, we also have 5 experts, researchers on several topics from Aachen University, the National Research Council of Italy, Eurecat, and the Technical University of Darmstadt. I will introduce them in more detail in the following presentations, but I also wanted to start by thanking all speakers for preparing such contents, and hopefully we will have a very fruitful evening today. So just first, before we move to the presentations, a couple of, let's say, logistics aspects that we need to comment. This session is being recorded, meaning that we hopefully will be able to share with you the recording afterwards in case you would like to review the materials. We will be having questions, hopefully, from all of you. To do that, you can write your questions on the chat that you can see in the control panel from GoToWebinar. And also, if you want to raise the question by voice, you could also raise your hand, and we will give you permission to formulate your question. And if not, you have the chat, and you have also a question box in which you can also place your question. We will keep the questions and answers to the final slot, the final questions and answers slot. Then we'll try to solve all your doubts or comments. If we have time in between presentations, we can also take 1 or 2. But if not, we will move to the next one and try to solve all of them at the end. So this would be it from my side. I will start by introducing Nestor Garcia, who will be presenting us an overview about the project. Nestor is the principal investigator of the Collaborative Manipulation Research Group at Eurecat's Robotic and Automation Unit. So Nestor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marina. So I guess we're going to see a video introduction of the project.
In the age of Industry 4.0, the industrial landscape is being transformed by technologies, allowing factories to be more connected and automated. Industrial robots have evolved considerably during the past decades, improving in productivity, efficiency, and security. But they are still not flexible enough to coexist and share production tasks with humans. The EU-funded project Sharework aims to provide robots with the necessary intelligence to safely work with humans without the need of protective barriers. Thanks to Sharework, industrial collaborative robots will be capable of understanding the environment and human behavior. A solution to boost process productivity and improve workers' well-being with better ergonomics and safety at the workplace. The resulting technology will be validated in the assembly areas of 4 different companies of the automotive, railway, metal, and capital goods manufacturing industries to evaluate its applicability in different industrial processes. A new smart robotic system for fostering industrial competitiveness in Europe. To find out more about Sharework, visit sharework-project.eu or find us on Twitter.
Yeah, so Sharework is a 4 years long project, which ends this October. So we are in the last 6-month period. The project had a budget of 7 million euros, and the consortium is composed of 15 partners across 6 European countries. And if we go to the next slide, yeah. So Sharework project is born due to the need for technology for an effective adoption of human-robot collaboration. So currently there are 2 million robots in the world, especially in the automotive sector, which EU is one of the world leaders. Nevertheless, collaborative robots account only for 5,000 units. So there's still space to grow these numbers. Also, in the last year, there's been a boom in Industry 4.0, which has driven investment in automation and has spurred companies interested in investing in cobots. So the cobot market is expected to reach a value of close to 4 million euros in 2023, given the high rate of return of investment. So Sharework aims to endow in industrial work environments with the necessary intelligence and methods for the effective adoption of human-robot collaboration without fences or other physical barriers. And for that, we've designed an mobile knowledge base and human-aware task planners and motion planners to control the robot behavior, as well as a multimodal human-robot communication system. Among that, we've been developing and working to have methods for overcoming human-related barriers in order to ensure successful integration of the system into current industrial scenarios. The developed technology will be proven and validated in 4 industrial scenarios in the railway, automotive, metal, and the capital goods industries. Our approach consists of developing a modular solution composed of 15 software and hardware models into 4 areas, which are perception, motion planning, safety and security, and human communication. And among all of them, there's always the human factors in order to collect feedback from the operators, which will be the final users of the developed technology, and try to improve our solution in order to fit their necessities. As said, the solution will be validated in 4 scenarios. So we have the railway led by Alstom, the metal use case led by Chamber, capital goods led by Gosper, and finally the use case in the automotive sector led by SEAT. So the project development was split or organized in 4 phases. A first phase of collecting all the requirements and the conceptualization of the solution, followed by a phase in which we develop the technology to be then validated in industrial, in lab environments, and we finally reach the phase in which we are right now, in which we are finally integrating the technologies in some demonstrators located in the end user facilities, where we're gonna validate our technology with real operators.
Thank you very much, Nestor, for this overview of the project. Now we will move to the next and first presentation of this training session with Andrea Orlandini. Andrea Orlandini is a researcher at the Institute of Cognitive Science and Technologies of the National Research Council in Italy, in Rome. He's a computer science engineer, and he received his PhD about artificial intelligence planning and robot control. And right now he's currently working within the planning and scheduling team at ISTC CNR. And this afternoon, Andrea will be presenting the ontological approach that they have developed for a human-robot collaborative environment. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction, and just a few words to say that this actually is a work that I made with some collaborators at CNR, in particular Amedeo Cesta, that is the coordinator of our research group, and Alessandro Umbrico, that is the main contributor for what concerns the practical work in the project. And we started working in human-robot collaboration, trying to increase the capabilities of the robots interacting with human operators, because these tight interactions that are actually implemented in the collaborative cells require to have somehow some additional capabilities in order to deal with the uncertainty and the safety challenges that are entailed by the presence of the humans inside the collaborative cell. And since the human behaviors are neither predictable nor controllable, the classical control approaches that are usually deployed for controlling collaborative robots requires somehow some additional flexibility and adaptability features in order to effectively and safely operate in highly dynamic scenarios such as the one in the collaborative production processes. In this sense, we are a group of artificial intelligence researchers that aims at applying AI techniques to robotics in order to improve the capability of the robot, and in particular implement what is generally called the perceive, reason, act paradigm to the robot control, so as to allow the robots to have a deeper understanding of the environment, to be able to reason in a more proper way in order to decide what activities should be performed, and to be more robust in the execution of these tasks. In this sense, in this first presentation, I will go a little bit in detail about the use of semantic technologies for knowledge processing in this kind of applications. There are several approaches for deploying knowledge management facilities in the human-robot collaboration scenarios, but there is something that is still missing. In particular, we need to have some ways for describing in a natural way the production processes in terms of tasks that humans and robots and other agents present in the cell can perform. We need a way to describe the human skills and capabilities in order to allow the control system to adapt the activities and the processes to the human workers that are actually interacting with the robots. And we need a way to characterize the safe interactions or collaborations to support the task allocation and commitment by the human and the robot. In this sense, we propose the use of ontology, and let's say that in the manufacturing scenarios, usually we have a lot of data that is captured by sensors or provided by the description of the processes, description of the tools, whatever. So we have a lot of data, but this data needs to have some meaning. We need to provide to assign some semantics to this data. In this sense, we can leverage ontology in order to build and provide more meaning to the data, building in this sense the information, and in particular considering also the possible relations among this data, build the knowledge that can be provided to the robot and to the control process in order to have a more adaptive and more flexible control for the collaborative robot. In this sense, in Sharework, we provided as a contribution of our research activity to define a domain ontology to characterize the human-robot collaborative processes, so to include production processes information, human factors information, and collaboration and safety specifications. And we proposed actually an ad hoc ontology that was built on top of several existing standard ontologies. The Dolce ontology is a very basic ontology that is used in a lot of real-world application. We then leverage also the semantic sensor network ontology for modeling all the part of the cells that concern the sensing, the perception part of the cells. And then we rely also on the CORA. The CORA standard ontology is an IEEE standard ontology for robotic systems. The choice of Dolce basically is because this is the most general foundational ontology for building to provide, let's say, a theoretical background, a theoretical framework for our domain ontology. The CORA ontology is a standard, is an IEEE standard, so it's something that is very useful to describe the configuration, the robot configuration, the robot parts, and the activities performed by an artificial agents like a robot. And in the CORA ontology in particular, we get some of the main concept in order to describe the robots and its parts, the processes to be implemented, and the robot configurations in order to implement all the physical activities that then should be deployed in order to perform the tasks that are needed to serve the collaborative cell. The semantic sensor network ontology was, on the other side, used to provide a representation and a semantics for all the information that can be gathered from sensors and from perception activities. In this sense, we selected some of the main concepts coming from this ontology. So, for instance, the description of sensors, observations, property that can be observable, and the features that are of interest for a specific production process. And we use this information to model and provide a formal representation of this kind of data that can be collected from the collaborative cell. Finally, we use all this information and formalism in order to propose the Sharework ontology for human-robot collaboration that we call SOHO, has been presented in a conference, in a CHIRP conference 2 years ago. And basically, we have the core of the ontology that is built on the Dolce ontology, the foundational ontology. We leverage the semantic sensor network and the core ontology to implement the basic functionalities. And then we distinguish between a production context to provide all the information related to the production task, the production requirements, and all the information related to the actual operations to be executed. The environment context, the environment context to have to represent all the information coming from the environment, so from the perceived environment, and a behavior context in order to represent all the factors related to human operators. In this sense, we have an integrated approach for knowledge representation that can be leveraged in order to serve any kind of high-level functionalities that can be implemented to control a collaborative robot. We follow an approach that describes the task in a hierarchical way. So we consider different hierarchical tasks that can be connected in order to represent the production process and characterize the execution of the activities. And we defined a formal description of the tasks that can be implemented by either the human or the robot, distinguishing between complex tasks that are composed by several activities or simple tasks that are basically basic functionalities that can be implemented by the human or the robot. The idea is basically to provide a formal description of all the activities and the capabilities and functions that are needed to structure a production process in order to provide a formal description of this information. We also leverage some ontological patterns in order to characterize the ways in which a human and a robot can collaborate in order to perform some specific task. In this sense, we have here a general description of what can be a production task. So we can have some robot functionalities to describe what the robot is actually capable of performing in the cell. We can have complex tasks described in terms of a sequence, for instance, of simple tasks, and then we have the human functions, so the description of what are the skills of the human operator in operating in the collaborative cell. Then we characterize and we use these ontological patterns in order to specify different collaborative modalities. In particular, we distinguish 4 collaborative modalities. We have the very simple collaboration in which the human and the robot are operating on different parts, performing different tasks, but sharing the same environment. So this is basically describing a coexistence scenario in which the robot and the operator are working together side by side, but with no direct interaction, no direct collaboration. Then there is a simultaneous collaboration pattern in which the robot and the operator are working on the same activity, on the same workpiece, but they are doing different tasks. So in this sense, they are doing something on the same piece, but with different functionalities. Then there should be a sequence of activities to implement the collaboration in which, for instance, the robot is first working on a workpiece, performing a specific task, and then only after the robot has finished his activity, then the human operator can continue the process on the same workpiece. In this sense, we are characterizing in a formal way all these requirements, and the most collaborative modality is the supportive collaboration modalities, in which the robot and the human are performing the same task on the same workpiece. In this sense, there is the maximum collaboration that can be reached in the execution, and the human and the robot are providing a strong synergy in order to execute the same task together on the same workpiece. These are just ways, these are just examples to generic example to describe the collaborative modalities that we have modeled, but actually these are the concrete ones that usually are used in the collaborative scenarios. In the Sharework project, we have applied this approach, so the idea of formalizing the information and the knowledge through the use of the SAW ontology, and we have used this approach in realistic scenarios, basically representing the pilots of the project. And I show you here a first application in a sort of toy problem that is actually a simplified version of one of the pilot in the project, in which there is a robot and a human operator collaborating to get some cubes of different colors in order to build a mosaic in this mosaic area that you can see on the right of the slide, that reproduce sort of initials for the Sharework project. So an S and a W in a sort of a mosaic shape of these letters. We used the SAW ontology to represent the functionalities and the goal of the production process. In this sense, we have a general goal that is to build a mosaic composed by several modalities and several activities. We have the pick and place that is a basic functionalities used by the robot and the operator to implement the specific activities, the specific step. So the fact that the robot is moving the blocks from a certain area to the mosaic area. And then we can apply the pattern that we have defined in order to distinguish between complex tasks and simple tasks that are the ones actually needed in order to implement the collaborative process, and reasoning on these functionalities. So the functionalities needed, the ones that you see here highlighted, the functionalities actually needed in order to implement the simple and complex task, we can perform some high-level reasoning. In this sense, this is a different view of the same information. We can, for instance, consider that one specific functionalities, the fact of perform a pick and place of a certain block, can be actually performed by an agent, and these activities require some capabilities that are, for instance, the ones highlighted in the slides, that can be, for instance, owned by an agent, in particular the robot. So we can infer in a dynamic way that implementing this activity requires some capabilities that are owned by the robot, and so we can infer that the robot is actually able to perform this specific task. And so this information can be leveraged in order to design who can be assigned to perform the specific task. Also, we can perform additional reasoning in order to distinguish between different relations between the tasks and the function. And so we can infer that the task, the simple task that requires the functionalities, can be actually assigned to the robot. This is just an example of the kind of reasoning, meta reasoning, that we can do in the knowledge base built upon the ontology. But this is something that can be then leveraged in order to provide some more smart behavior to the control of the robot, and then to provide more intelligent support to the activities of the human operator. This was just, in some sense, the sort of rush in describing the capability of the SOA ontology and how we implemented this activity, this technology, sorry, to the human-robot collaborative scenarios considered in the Sharework application. We are now investigating the extension of SOA in order to include in a more proper and deep way all the safety aspects that are relevant in order to consider a more proper human-robot collaboration and application. And we are also considering some knowledge-based abstraction methodology in order to facilitate the definition of the data from the domain expert and the production engineers. This is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, you can do it in the chat or send me an email. And that's it from my side. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this presentation. For now, we don't have any questions, so I encourage all the attendees to, if you have any, to write them on the chat, and we'll try to solve them afterwards in the questions and answers block. Now, before we move to the next presentation, we will launch first, let's say, short survey. We are going to have two in between of each presentation. If you could launch the first one. We are going to have one that is related to contents that Andrea Orlandini has explained. If you can vote, so we can test if okay. We'll give 2 more seconds. I'll tell you the answers, Andrea, so then you can explain which was the correct one. For now, 50% of the attendees say that Dolce is the standard. Yeah, Dolce with 50%, 36% Cora, 30% SSN.
Okay.
Can you explain whether they are right, saying that Cora is the standard ontology or not?
Yeah, actually, the standard ontology for robotics and automation is the Cora ontology. That is the IEEE standard for representing robots and autonomous agents in general. So the correct one is the Cora answer, is the Cora ontology.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we can launch the second survey. These are satisfaction survey based on this presentation. Basically, we need this for internal assessment and also to the European Commission. So we can share the second one. Okay, it seems we have a technical problem with the second one, so we'll move to the next presenter. Thank you very much, Andrea. We'll have you later at the questions and answers. So I will now introduce our next presenter today, Niels Mandischer. He's a scientific employee at the Aachen University, specifically at the Institute of Mechanism Theory, Machine Dynamics and Robotics. Hello, Niels.
Hello.
So his main fields of research are computer vision, sensor data, and human-robot collaboration. And today he will be presenting us his main contribution in Sharework project related to item detection, localization. So Niels, whenever you are ready.
Okay, then let's start. So as Melina already said, my name is Niels Mandischer. I am a scientific employee at the RWTH Aachen University. And my part of the Sharework project was to implement different approaches for object detection, especially on larger workspaces. And no, my presenter is not working. Okay. And this is the structure of the presentation for today. So we'll first give you a brief introduction of what Aachen University is doing in Sharework, then show you some theoretical background on learning strategies, show you how we implemented computer vision in the project, give you a brief discussion and lessons learned on the topic so that you can learn and keep something for yourself, and then give you a small conclusion in the end. Let's start with an introduction. So when we think about computer vision, many people think about different things. So let's give it a formalism first. So computer vision is a field of remote sensing that allows machines to understand the environment. This means that once we deploy computer vision, we deliver information to our system, which can later be used, for example, by the ontology that Andrea showed before, to work out how, for example, robots can work with humans. Most algorithms are bound to machine learning, so we need to teach our system how objects are like, and therefore learning is the typical approach that we use here. So in the base, computer vision is something between sensor technology, artificial learning, and data science, and this is what we will talk about now. First, I will give you a small introduction into learning strategies that are a bit less common, so especially on tree learning and forest learning. So I think some of my colleagues later will also talk about neural networks, but what you will see in this presentation is more feature-based learning. And I will give you a small example of my usual work. So on the right side, you see a leg pair of human legs detected by laser scans. So this is what it typically looks like. And now for a learning approach, we need to input some features. So this means we need to analyze those laser points in order to find out features that define those legs. And as an output, we can get different stuff from our learning strategies. For example, here we get the class detection, leg or non-leg. But out there are also other algorithms that, for example, give you the location of objects or similar stuff. And while we're talking about features, a feature is a specific description of a characteristic of our data. If you have any data series, so this can be completely different characteristics, but I will just give you a brief example on how you can determine scalar or multidimensional features. So for example, typically for leg detection, we define the best fit circle diameter. So our first feature typically is the diameter of this point cloud. So let's give it any value. So let's say 12 centimeters. But we need more features. Now, later on, those are applied to analyze our data. So this would now tell us that every single data set that has a diameter of 0.12 will be determined the leg later on. So we need to have more features. So for example, the length and the width of our data set, or the number of points that we have in there, and so on and so on. So typically you define a lot of different features in order to analyze your data and characterize your data. And then you get a vector that is called a feature vector. And you analyze your data. So basically first you cluster your data into different sets. For example, there's two legs. Then you put in your feature values, and then you get a feature vector describing this data. And once you run it through your learning algorithm, you will get the classification of a leg. If we apply this to tree learning, and this is a typical tree, we typically have a stem node that is at the top of our tree, and then we have different leaves. On each of our nodes, feature decisions are made. So this means I compare one of my feature values with the correct threshold that I've determined before, and then I either move to the left side or to the right side. And if I land on a leaf, this leaf carries a decision, for example, leg or non-leg. And if I travel down multiple nodes, this is called a branch. Now, what makes this classifier specifically strong, also comparable to neural networks, is that we combine many of those trees into a forest, and every single tree votes in the end. And there's a handy thing that already Bernoulli introduced in 1730, that if I observe a very small sample from a larger data sample, then it will always depict the true average population. And we can make this even handier for forests. This means the more trees I have, the better my consensus will be. So this means if I have indefinite many trees, then the percentage of my majority vote in the end will be almost 100% for the correct class. And this is what makes these classifiers pretty well suited for different tasks. And at the base, they are also pretty understandable. So comparable to neural network learning, where it's hard to determine what those networks are really doing, a random forest based on the features that you've analyzed on your own is way easier to understand for yourself. Now I will show you how this tree is built. So I first pick a random subset of features. So as I had in my example before, we have 5 different features. We pick 3 features per tree, and therefore we define 2 different random subsets of features. But this is not everything that is random here. So we also have a training set. So let's say we want to train our classifier on legs. We have our 2 leg examples. Now we can run a classifier with our training set, and we get 2 different classes, correctly classified and falsely classified samples. And then there's something that is called gene impurity. So this tells us how impure our leaf nodes are. So at the best, we have an impurity of 0, which means that all our leaf nodes vote on the correct class. And with this criterion, we can optimize our tree. But first, we don't feed in the full dataset in each tree, but we use a random subset of our training set with replacement. This is called bagging. So we get a bootstrap sample from this. This is the output of bagging. And we put it in each individual tree that we feed in with our random features from the left side. And therefore, we define how our threshold is determined in the end with the gene impurity. And therefore, we build a tree. So for example, we pick the first feature set, we put in our first bootstrap sample, and then we get a tree. And then we build a second tree with the same criterion, but with another bootstrap sample. And therefore, we get 2 different trees that do the vote on the same data set, but with different features, and will eventually come to the same conclusion, might also come to a different conclusion. But in the end, the more trees we build, the more robust our classifier will be. And this so far for a theoretical background. Now we come to the application part of this presentation. So how did we transport computer vision to the Sharework project? So usually when you classify data, you need to train this on data, of course. So the more data you have, the better your result will be in the end. But what you usually do, and where you get your benchmark data from in scientific papers, for example, is you look at different benchmarks. For example, on the right side, I put in a picture of the ModelNet benchmark, and you directly see that those point clouds are very accurate. So very accurate. So if you want to have inaccurate data, it's always on the side of the user to disturb this data. So usually you train your data on either CAD data or simulated data, and you can also do this on recordings. So on the bottom right, you see what we recorded in the Sharework project with our different cameras. And you see that the real data is much less precise than the artificial data. So concluding with this is that algorithms that train on these artificial data sets used to fail on the real data because they cannot abstract to the real level of noise that we have in our real application. So what makes this already a hard task to apply computer vision to real tasks is that you need to find out which scientific publications can really tree transported into real data. And this doesn't really make an apprehensive approach to just check the benchmarks. So we actually implemented, when we started out, like 5 or 6 of the top-notch networks from the ModelNet benchmark, and every single one of them failed on the real data. And we needed to go down a lot in ranks to find an algorithm that really works with real data. So you cannot always tell that if an algorithm performs well on artificial data, that it can also be transported to real data. And when you go to a real application, one thing besides learning is that if you want your algorithm to run fast, then you also need a good data model. So what I depict here is a voxel representation of OLAP. And this voxel implementation we get from an octree. And an octree at the base is again a tree, but with 8 nodes on each level. So this means I have one big cube, and once I put in data, I split this one cube into 8 equally shaped cubes. And if I then again input data in one of the smaller cubes, then I split this cube and so on. This means that if I have a lot of data at one singular space in my workspace, then the tree will get very deep in this part. And if I have sparse data on the other side, the representation will be less deep in my tree. And this will come in handy later on when we apply our algorithms, and this will, for one, save storage on my hard drive, and on the other side, allow me to faster access my data. And there's also one handy thing that comes with octrees that is called pruning. So if I split my whole tree and I build it up, then I will get deeper regions, which are more dense. And if I have similar data samples in there, for example, I have split my node into 8 black cubes. This means that I can then prune this to get one larger black cube. So this means that I can backwardly go through my tree and combine multiple similar cubes to one higher level cube. And this is called pruning, and this makes the storage on my hard drive even smaller and the accessibility to our data representation much faster. So at the base, if you want to perform real-time data analysis on 3D data, then you will not be able to avoid a data structure, for example, like ours here. So just as a general reference, what we put in to achieve this voxel data on the right side, we put in more than 100 million data points, which are just from one single snapshot of each of our 4 cameras. And you can imagine that you will not be able to compute anything on more than 100 million points in real time. So this representation has much less. So it's in hundreds of voxels, 100,000 of voxels. So this will make everything much easier and more lenient. Now, if we work to Sharework project, our task was to localize items on a large workspace. So therefore we need this data abstraction. And for the other part, detect screws, which are then used in task planning later on to perform autonomous screwing of rotary tables. And this is what we did to achieve real-time or close real-time data analysis on large workspaces. So we're now speaking here about a workspace of 40 square meters that we can analyze with snapshot 3D cameras. And we had a lot of different constraints on this. So we have the high time constraint of near real time. We have high data load of more than 100 million points. And we have especially noisy data because the cameras that we use for this are consumer cameras with high resolution, and those high resolution cameras operate not that well in real applications because they tend to have very noisy depth data, and therefore we had to deal with a lot of different stuff to come out with a pipeline in the end. So first we use different image differencing to filter out everything that is moving. So we only assume that there are still standing items. Then we apply our octree structure to this. Then we transform our octree to 2D data because we even observed that while the octree saves data, we still were not able to compute this in near real time. So we needed to transform upwards our octree to achieve a top-down 2D image of our workspace. In this workspace, we then find objects based on canny edge detection, morphological operations. So canny edge detection basically detects the edges of anyhow shaped objects, and therefore we can unsupervised, so without any learning, find our objects in the environment, and then we feed everything into a neural network. This is called RSCNN. This is also in the ModelNet benchmark, and can then classify our data sample. And on the right side, you now see the image differencing. So this is the first step where you can filter out all your dynamic objects. So actually here for a demonstration, we switched it and only kept the dynamic objects. And therefore you can later also filter out what is new in your environment. So for example, if I move a wrench around, then it will show up. Or if I put it in a shelf that was already there, and it will vanish and so on. So this can be very handy if you want to observe a large workspace. And on the other side, you see the average pipeline accuracy for different workshop items. And you see that we achieve different accuracies depending on the workshop item. So most of them are pretty well determined, but some fail. This is because the algorithm cannot completely comprehend with the real data and the noise according to it. But overall, the performance is acceptable given the requirements that we defined beforehand. So this whole system is available in near real time in 1200 milliseconds, which is exceptionally fast if you consider that there are more than 100 million input points per scan. On the other hand, we made a more, let's say, generally usable approach where we wanted to localize screws. And the challenges here were not that we have high constraints, but that the system should be as lenient as possible to be trainable by users directly. So the task was to determine where screws are and where holes are so that a robot can put in screws into holes. So first, we needed to find again where the possible candidates were that we used our classifier on. This we used the half circuits transform. I will not go deeply into this. Then we classify screws using our random forest that I've presented before. And then we wrap this pipeline into an UI. So actually it's a console-based UI, so not really a GUI. And this will show you all the screws that you've taken images from. So you need about 10 photos. Then the algorithm segments those candidates. You put them in, you decide if this is a screw or hole, then it trains the classifier. And then you can put the algorithm to any application that you like. And therefore it will show you where screws and where holes are, which you see on the bottom left. And also if I move through this with the hand, then the algorithm will briefly not show those parts, but once they are not occluded, it will show them again. And we achieved almost 90% of accuracy with this approach. So this works pretty well, and we've also shown together with Goisper that it is possible to properly screw in screws with this approach. let's move on to the discussion. So what have we learned today is that there's an issue with artificially trained models, that they don't have the right noise data to properly be transported to real applications. They mostly use stochastic noise or random noise, while random noise on a PC is mostly not completely random. And the noise that comes, for example, from stereoscopic cameras cannot be properly modeled with this. And therefore, models trained on artificial data often fail in the real world. And if we want to learn lessons from this, so I need always to trade between different trade-offs. So if I want an algorithm, I need to consider beforehand what I want to do. Do I want to have it accurately, or do I want to have it fast? So if I want to have it accurately, then I have a large input data size, then it will take a long time. So it's naturally. So I will not have the best of all worlds in one single approach. And this is also true for item size. So if I have low resolution cameras which can compute fast, I cannot detect small items. So the size of the items is also bound to the resolution of my data, obviously. And then there's also the point of what algorithm I should use for learning. For example, explainability versus the model power itself. So usually neural networks are much more powerful than forests, but forests, based on how I determine my features, are way more explainable. So they are even so explainable that I can give it to an untrained user who never saw a learning algorithm before, and they understand what's going on. And this comes in very handy. So you don't need to pick the best model available and the most apprehensive. You just need to pick the one that is correct for your use case. And this takes a lot of time to really learn this, that you need to pick the correct model. And there's also hardware versus model type. So for example, forests can also be computed purely on CPUs, and for neural networks usually use graphic accelerators, and therefore it's also depending on this one. Let's come to a conclusion. So what did I show you? I introduced some learning methods, and then I showed you how networks are trained, how you can structure your data, and how it is transported to the real world. What we did in Sharework, so the two applications of item detection and screw detection, and then I gave you some remarks on what you can take home for your own application, and therefore I hope that a training session will also help you to learn how to properly choose which models to use, which data to use, and how you can transport this to your own application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Niels, for this very educational presentation on object detection. I think you have provided some basic concepts that are very important on learning strategies to allow machines to understand the surroundings. We also touched computer vision and lessons learned in Sharework project. I think we can launch now a second survey related to some concepts that Niels explained. Yeah, so the question is, what is a special operation in octrees? And you have three options: pruning, bagging, and background subtraction. We'll give just a few seconds so to make sure that we have an active audience and that there is nobody asleep already. Good. I think that almost everybody got it. We can, okay, 3 more seconds. Okay, I think we can close the survey because almost everybody selected the same answer. The answer was for you, Niels, 70% think that it's pruning, 20% bagging, and 10% background subtraction. Can you please explain which one is the correct answer?
Yeah, the correct answer is pruning. So this is the process of combining multiple nodes into one single node in my org tree.
Thank you. So almost, yeah, 7 out of 10 chose the correct one. Good. Thank you very much, Niels, again. We'll have you in the final questions and answer session. We will now launch another survey related to your satisfaction about this training session, whether it was useful or not. And in the meanwhile, we will move to the next presenter, Majid Almau. Majid will give now the right to present. Okay. So Majid is a researcher at Eurecat Technology Center here in Catalonia, in Spain. He's an industrial engineer from the Polytechnic University of Catalonia, and he also owns a master in intelligent interactive systems. And he's working at Eurecat's robotics and automation unit within the collaborative manipulation research group. So he will be today delivering a presentation about human tracking for an effective human-robot interaction. Majid, whenever you are ready, you can start.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Marina, for presenting me. Very detailed presentation. Yes, effectively, we are talking now about human tracking. Okay. And yes, in this talk, we will get a few words about the state of the art of this challenge. We also will see a high-level overview of our solution, our model in the Sharework project. And then we will get through the technical details of the implementation of our model, the main concepts. And as this is an application for robotics, we are obviously fully committed with ROS. So we will explain quickly the ROS integration of this model and also which are the outputs of the model. So let's quickly go through the state of the art. But first, let me mention why it is important to do this human tracking. Why it is important to track humans, especially in the case of collaborative robotics. We need to know where it is the human for many reasons, but just to put a couple of examples, we need to know where it is the human for safety reasons. We can plan the movements of the robot according to the position of the human to avoid, for instance, collisions with the arm of the operator. And we also can use this human tracking for another more high-level purpose that could be, for instance, improve the working conditions of the operator. If we know how is the posture of the operator, we can then just modify the motions of the robot to increase the ergonomy of the operator in the collaborative task. So, as I said, this is an important topic, but it is also a challenging topic that it has been tackled in many ways. One of the, I can say that a more basic approach, it is the use of optical markers. You can see in the picture in the right, a person wearing a black suit with optical markers attached, which permits to the system to, through the cameras, detect where are these markers located in the 3D space, and then have a reconstruction of the, for instance, the skeleton of the person. But as you can imagine, many of you has visited a factory, and I guess that you don't imagine of the workers of the floor plan with these suits and these markers. So it is not practical for industrial scenarios. So we can take advantage of the new advances in AI and deep learning and computer vision to produce a non-invasive markerless technology. And in this sense, we can identify two main approaches that uses deep learning to estimate the position of the human bodies. The first one could be these top-down approaches, and we have an example of implementation with AlphaPose. in which first they are detecting multiple persons globally, and then for each bounding box that they are created, they infer the pose of each person as a single problem, right? This is a more simple pipeline, but can lead to duplicated bounding boxes and then suboptimally performance, especially when two persons are very close and some body parts are kind of mixed in the image. So we can also have bottom-up approaches, like for instance the implementation of open pose, in which first we are detecting all the body parts in the image, and then we need to assign these detected parts to the different individuals. So we are training a neural net not only to identify where are the body parts, but also to identify which body part is owned by who. No? So we have here two learning processes. But nevertheless, these approaches are 2D and was the starting point of the implementation of our solution. So let's put in context our model in the Sharework project. This model is at the beginning of the information processing chain, and the input comes directly from the environment camera, so it's raw information. And the results of our model can then be processed by other models to infer higher knowledge and act in consequence. For instance, I said before that we can use this knowledge to avoid collision when we are planning movements of the road. So specifically, our model is locating and detecting the body postures of the workers without using markers, as I said, or any other devices in the body. Also, I want to mention that we are using multiple 3D cameras that are distributed accordingly to the process in the environment, and we are using these multiple cameras, to minimize occlusions and also to maximize accuracy. Finally, it's also worthy to mention that we are hardware agnostic. As I was saying, all the modeler runs in ROS, so every camera that runs in ROS can be used for our modeler for all the pipeline. So the structure of the modeler is as follows. We have the inputs of the cameras at the left part of the pipeline here. These cameras provide RGB and depth information, and with only the RGB part of this information, we can estimate the 2D position of the person, and we will combine this information with the depth information to reconstruct the 3D pose of the human, and we repeat this process in parallel for all the cameras in the environment. So at the end, we will need to synchronize this data. So we have this synchronization step, and to fusion and filtering this data to produce a more accurate and robust estimation of the 3D position that then will be forwarded, processed by other models in the Sharework project. So let's go to the first step. As I was mentioning, we need to estimate the 2D position of the human body part. For this, we are using an off-the-shelf model, which is open pose, but again, we are agnostic to which model it is being used. If it produces where are these 2D body parts in the image. So as I was saying, the open pose is using the RGB information. Then it locates where are the 2D coordinates, or the pixel coordinates of each body point. And open pose is detecting all the humans in the scene simultaneously, and we are able to detect 25 key points of the human body. So open pose at a high level works like this. I will explain it now. We are able to classify pixels if they belong to a certain key point, or if it belongs to just the background. Then also they generate part confidence map, which means that they are storing the pixel probability of belonging of a given class, and then the local maxima of each probability distribution correspond to the location of the different key points. In addition, as I said before, we are in a bottom-up approach, so so we need to now to relate which body parts corresponds to which person. So for this, we are generating part affinity fields and storing these vector fields to identify which key points belongs to the same skeleton. You can see an image of these fields in the bottom left image, which is the vector, and you have the vector from the shoulder to the knee, to the elbow here. Yeah, and then with this open pose output that I insist that is this 2D estimation, we can combine this information with the depth information and generate the 3D pose of the human. To do so, for each detected key point, we compute the 3D position of the neighboring pixels using the depth information. Then the pixels are discarded if the equivalent 3D point or the 3D information of this point is not available, so does not exist, belongs to the environment, or is outside of the monitoring area. For instance, you don't want to track a person that is just walking at the site of the working place, right? So we also use the part confidence map that I was mentioning before. We use this part confidence map to weight the importance or the contribution of each neighbor. And then with this information, we can construct a weighted barycenter and a weighted covariance matrix, and then obtaining a normal distribution of each 3D key point, sorry. So then finally, the detected skeletons are rejected if they don't have a minimum of valid points, or if the estimation that is produced is not human-like. For instance, because of a noise estimation, you can obtain a skeleton that the height of the person is set as 3 meters. So obviously, this is not human-like, at least for now. And yeah, and this estimation should be rejected. So here we have pictures of that illustrate somehow what I was trying to explain. Here we have in the middle the part confidence maps, but represented in the 3D space. As you can see here, the more warm colors indicates that there are more probability to belong to the key point that they are representing. You can see some of the neighbors that are in the background for the extremities of the body, and this is consequently also translated in the covariances of the body that you can see at the right in the picture in the right. You can see that the resulting covariance are sparser in the optical axis direction, since there is more uncertainty in the depth estimation. So the multi-diffusion sensor and detection refinement. The human position can be estimated with a camera, as we just seen in the last slide, but the covariance are bigger than required for an industrial scenario. And also multiple cameras can improve the robustness and the accuracy and avoid occlusions, since we can take advantages from different point of views. But then we need data fusion and filtering. This data fusion and filtering expects that the cameras have a common reference frame. So a calibration of the camera network is required, and the detection of the same workers, but obtained with the different cameras, should be grouped to be considered. We are working at a constant rate, the one from the cameras, and we are processing the information in batches. So as I was saying, we need to group the observations and correctly associate each observation with the real human in the scene. Sorry. For this, we are trying to overlap the tracked person for the system, and the observation in a certain time. So we are trying to overlap this, for instance, with bounding box, with the tracked person in one side and the observation in the other. And if the two bounding box matches and are exclusive, meaning that only a tracked skeleton is matched with observation, then the labeling is clear, the pairing is clear, all is nice. But what if not? What if two people are close and then the tracked and the observations are overlapping? So here we have a more complicated scenario, but we solved it by solving an optimization problem in which we are minimizing the global error of the distances between the different key points of the tracked humans in the scene and the observation in a certain moment. So with this, we achieve to monitor and to track all the humans in the scene group. So the remaining unpaired observations corresponds to new workers, and the unpaired tracked skeletons corresponds to people who have left the environment or are hidden to all the cameras. And if after a certain period of time no other updates are received, then they will be no longer tracked by the system. So now we have the observation grouped for each skeleton, and then we have to reach a consensus to produce a reliable 3D pose estimation. And it is also important to consider the anatomical and kinematic human model to improve this estimation, to produce reliable estimation. So in this sense, one can describe the estimation of the skeleton 3D poses as the estimation of a state which cannot be directly observed, but we can use noisy estimations or noisy evidences from the observation, which evolution can be modeled in a non-Gaussian and non-linear way. So we are therefore facing a case of application of particle filters. For this, we have defined our state. We can say it as a human state, in which you can have a representation here at the right. We have the root position of the human. In our case, we located it in the mid hip because we found that it is one of the more reliable points to estimate. We are also estimating the height of the tracked human. So we don't have a predetermined height and just like this, but we are estimating dynamically the height. We are also capturing how are the joint position of the human, and we are also estimating all the velocities. So a generic human model, anatomical model is used, and then in this model we encode how the body is articulated, what are the joint limits and the body proportions that are relative to the height of the person that is estimated. So with this, any state of the state space is anatomically compatible with the body posture. So the modeling of the state evolution is simpler because are joints mostly, but the state cannot be directly observed. So to propagate this state, each state variable is assumed to follow an independent constant speed motion with a sampleable acceleration noise, except for the height, obviously, because the height is hopefully not changing in the scene for the same person. But we don't have a direct relationship of the state and the observations. You can imagine why, but I will explain. You in the state you have the joint position of the human body, but in the observation you have only the 3D position of the key point. So it's not the same measurement. But hopefully we have a mapping from this joint state to this Cartesian space, and that we can do it with forward kinematics, and then we can compute the likelihood of each particle with respect to the 3D location of all the key points observed by the different cameras. Then those particles with higher likelihood values are preserved and encouraged to produce the next generation of particles. So as a result of all this process, we have a better estimation of 3D human poses that are, as I mentioned, that are all the estimations are human-like because we are considered the anatomical model, and these estimations are more accurate and robust as a result of taking advantage of different points of view that are offered by the multiple cameras in the scene. So as I was saying, this is a robot application, so we are fully committed with ROS, and at the beginning of the model, or as the starting point, we have the input of the cameras that are from ROS directly, so any camera with ROS can work with this. And then also our model is publishing the output in ROS, in particular in a Sharework defined message, which contains 4 levels of information. The first one is the human location. Then we have the location of the center of mass of the person. And we have also the bounding box that includes the detected operator. And finally, the complete location of all the body parts or the key points of the skeleton in a builded Sharework message skeleton. So to conclude, we have here our main achievements. Yeah, we are happy to announce that we have a good accuracy and precision, at least in the lab test that are but real scenarios. But we have pending also the integration of this model in the actual real scenario, the actual industrial scenario. And then we will produce further analysis. But just here to see it, you can see that the algorithm is robust enough to track coherently the person is in the scene, even when they have crossed it, and all this without using any face detection or any marker or something like that. So these are our final results, and yeah, that's all from our side. We will be happy to hear our questions, and yeah, let's just stay in touch in Twitter or LinkedIn.
Thank you, Maggi. Thank you very much for this presentation on the advancements done on human tracking and what we have achieved in Sharework project. I think we have touched some basic concepts on this area and state of the art and what we have done to advance this state of the art a little bit further. We have a question, but as we are a little bit delayed, I suggest to save it for the final questions and answer block. So I would ask the technical team to launch the next short survey on the content that Maggi presented, which is the following. So how are multiple cameras used in human tracking to minimize occlusions, to make the 3D reconstructions, or both are correct? We'll leave just a few seconds. Okay, people voted very quickly. I think we can close it. Yes, because almost everybody voted. So they said 77% think that both are correct. So both to minimize occlusions and to make 3D reconstruction. Is that true, Maggi?
Well, maybe it is not clear enough the question, but what we were expecting to answer is that multiple, the first answer, that multiple.
To minimize occlusions was the first one.
To minimize occlusions, since we were referring with construct the 3D position using several cameras as the stereo case scenario in which 2 RGB cameras are used to construct the 3D position. Certainly, with the use of several cameras, we are improving the 3D estimation, but we are referring to that. So yeah, probably is just a misunderstanding with the question here.
Thank you, Majid, for the explanation. So let's launch the satisfaction survey regarding Majid. And in the meanwhile, I will tell you that we are going on a short break until 3:35. I think that all of us deserve a quick break. And then please don't leave. We will be continuing with two other very interesting presentations, one on primitives learning in the context of Industry 4.0, and the final one regarding understanding human actions for a better human-robot collaboration. So we are going to go on a short break and come back in 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Hello again. This was a short break, but a much needed one, I guess. So we are going to resume with the rest of the presentations. I would like to welcome Julen Urey. Julen, I've made you now presenter. Julen is a PhD candidate at the Technical University of Darmstadt. He's a 4-year PhD student in the Intelligent Autonomous Systems group. And his main fields of research are the imitation learning and density estimation. And in Sharework, he's contributing in the field of building gesture and motion models to predict human motion. So in this presentation, he will focus on basic concepts in density estimation and also explain several probabilistic models. Julen, without further delay, you can start whenever ready. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So let's see. Okay, let me see. All right, wait. Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Julen Urey, and as Marina says, I'm a 4th-year PhD student in the Technical University of Darmstadt, and I'm presenting a small introduction of the work that I have been doing in the context of Sharework. So let's start. Oops. Okay, so my presentation is going to start with a short introduction of what density estimations is, and then I will show a set of, I'm going to explain a little bit about density estimation, and then I'm going to show some applications in which density estimation models can be applied in the context of robotics. So the aim of my talk is to present a set of problems and methods in which robotics on one side and machine learning on the others are somehow combined. So yeah, and usually in robotics, we have like two blocks. On the one hand, we used to have the perception block that takes the information from the environment and generates these observations into some meaningful state with which we can afterwards make decisions. In the action block, instead, we take this state information and we transform some possible action to interact with the environment and change this environment to satisfy a particular objective. On the other hand, in machine learning, we have like multiple different fields, from regression problems to dimensionality reduction to classification or even to density estimation. And my work today is the one of introducing how can we use these density estimation models for both the perception and also I'm going to explain a little bit about the action part. So how can we use this machine learning technique called density estimation for perception and for action blocks in robotics? All right. So let me introduce you first. What is density estimation, or what is better probabilistic density estimation? So if we observe it here in the drawing that we have in the right, what we aim for in density estimation is we aim for learning a model that could represent a data set that we have as input. In particular here, what I'm showing is how a kernel density estimation model adapts to the data set that we have. As we can see, like when the red line is having high values, this means that it has like high probability. And in the regions in which it has low value, it means that it has low probability. We can see that the high probability regions are going to be the regions and the marks are just a data points. So the idea is that in the regions in which we have more data, we want to have higher probabilities, and in the regions in which we have very few data, we want to have lower probability. All right, so 1 second. Oops. Okay, so and what we need to do here. So usually in order to learn a density estimation module, we need 2 elements. On the one hand, the data set that we will call it D, and some distribution model P that is going to represent like that is the model that we are aiming to match. So what we can do with this? So what is this useful for? So once we have a model that represents the distribution of our data, we can do very several things, but mostly we can divide them in 2. On the one hand, we can sample from it. So we could generate a sample that is similar to the demonstrations that we have in our data set. And on the other hand, we could also evaluate a sample. So given that we have a new sample, we can input it in the LearnNet model, and it is going to tell us how likely this sample is to the data that we have as demonstrations. And given these 2 properties of the density models, we can have multiple different applications. All right. So let me introduce you a set of density models. So one of the most important things in density estimation, as I said, is the density model P or Rho here. And this model can have multiple architectures and multiple representations. And depending how the model is, the performance is going to differ. So the idea of an engineer that works in data analysis and that works with data in machine learning is to actually figure out which is the model that fits better to his needs. For example, here, I want to show an example in which what we aim for is we aim for learning a model that match as well as possible these 2 modes. And I'm going to go through 3 different models, such as we can observe how each of the model learns. So let's start with the Gaussian model. That is the simplest one. When we run a Gaussian that is composed of very simple points, we can see that the distribution will fit somehow in the middle of the demonstrations, but it's not going to be able to represent properly the demonstrations. So if for any reason afterwards we aim to sample a point that it looks similar to the demonstrations, the Gaussian is not going to be enough, at least for this data set. Let's see, for example, the Gaussian measure model. So what a Gaussian measure model is just a combination of multiple small Gaussians. And when put them together, what we can observe is that they are going to cover different regions of the space. And so we can have a better estimate of the data that we are trying to match. As a drawback of this is that the more modes that we have in this mixture model, the more parameters that we have. So in terms of representation, the Gaussian measure model is going to be more expensive than the Gaussian model. Finally, the normalizing flows are a set of models that can represent a very complex distribution through neural networks. And let's see the performance. So as we can see, the normalizing flows are more powerful than the Gaussian mixture models in terms of representation. And as we can see, it covers perfectly the demonstrations. Nevertheless, these models used to require like way more parameters and are more computationally expensive. So it's important always to think on how complex my data is before choosing the model that we are going to use. I would not suggest to use normalizing flows if you are not requiring to represent a very complex or difficult distribution. But there are like tons more. Like for example, the kernel density models are models that are non-parametric. So a priori, the more data that you input, the more parameters that you can have. So in the long run, they could become like too inefficient. But for few data, it's a good model. Energy-based models that are also based on neural networks and score-based models, to name few, but there are way more. Additionally, and particularly important for robotics, are the conditioned models. In several robotic tasks, we may have the situation in which we want to learn a distribution that depends on a different variable. Like, for example, let's assume that we learn to learn the distribution of how we should interact with the environment. Depending on where is the state in which the robot is, the distribution of the actions that the robot should do should vary. And therefore, what we are learning is a conditioned distribution, a conditioned density model. On the other hand, let's assume that, for example, we want to learn a prediction module that could predict where the car is going to move depending on its current state. So these predictive models are also going to be conditioned on the current or the previous steps that the car has done. And depending on how he has been moving, we can predict better where it's going to be in the future. So these models are conditioned models. All right. So up to now, I have introduced how we can represent, how can we represent a model, and now I'm going to very briefly introduce how we can train them. So as I said, what we need in density estimation is a model P and a data set P. And usually the approach to train these models is by maximum likelihood estimation. So what we aim in maximum likelihood estimation is to find the parameters theta of our model that maximizes over the data that we have. So it's actually over the expected. So what we are trying to maximize is the expected value of our probability distribution with respect to the demonstrations that we have. This maximum likelihood estimation for different possible models will change. For example, in Gaussian models, we have a closed form solution in which we can find the mean and the variance. In the norm, like we can see, in which we have here the mean and variance. Then in the normalizing flows, we have a way more complex distribution in which we have to do a trade-off between the entropy term and matching the data. And finally, in the energy-based models also, so the general idea that I want to show here is that even if the regular loss function or the regular function that we want to optimize in these energy-based models is the maximum likelihood estimation, but then depending on the model that we have chosen, we are going to represent this loss in a different way. All right. So up to now, I have introduced a lot of theory, I guess, about the different type of models that we have and how we can train them. And now what I want to do is I want to present a set of different applications in which we can use the density models. And I have named 4 mainly, yet probably there are way more. I guess that these 4 might be the most important things for robotics. These are using it as generative model, as a cost function, as a classifier, or for data analysis. Let's start with the generative modeling. So in generative modeling, or using the density models as generative modeling, is the problem of trying to use the model as a function that could generate samples that look similar to the data. For example, here we have the case in which we have a lot of, let's assume that we have a lot of images of faces, and we want to learn a model, a density model, from which if we sample a new sample, this sample will look similar to the data set that we have. A different application of generative modeling is the one in robotics in which we can maybe teach a motion for solving a task to a robot with multiple demonstrations, and what we aim for is that the robot will perform similarly to the motions that we did. It's important to consider that in these cases, depending on the model that we are considering, the network that we are going to choose is going to be different. Like, for example, if we want to generate images, we are going to use networks like convolutional neural networks. Yet, if we aim to generate motion, we may consider architectures that will consider important inductive biases for us, such as stability, periodicity, or obstacle avoidance, to name a few. A different applications of the density estimation models is to use it as a cost function. So let's assume, for example, this case. Let's assume that we have the case of autonomous driving. In autonomous driving, we want to solve an optimization problem in which the action that the robot should apply should satisfy multiple constraints. The motion of the robot should go in through the lanes, the motion of the robot should avoid the obstacles like other cars, or even should maintain a certain velocity limit. In this concept, applying density models as cost functions means that we can learn the distribution models and add them as an additional cost function in our optimization problem. If we do that, then what we aim for is that the actions that the robot will do should look similar to the actions that we have as demonstrations. In robotics, to this particular task, we call it inverse reinforcement learning or inverse optimal control. Let me give you an example here that is pretty intuitive. So let's assume that we have this green demonstration on how to move, like a demonstration of movement, on how we wish to move. And we have an image of the environment in which we are moving. If we learn a cost function out of this data, then the cost function will look somehow like this. This function is basically giving low value, that is the black region, to the actions that are moving through the trajectory, through the lane, yet very high cost to the regions that are out of the road. If now we use this cost function that we have as in a trajectory optimization problem, what we will find is that the motion that the robot will do will follow the lane. Nevertheless, and this is actually where it's interesting, these density models, if instead the demonstrations are not going through the lane, but actually out of the road, the cost function will provide very low cost to the regions that are going out of the road. And therefore, if we afterwards generate a motion, the robot will move not through the lanes, but actually out of the lanes. So we can see that it's interesting that we can learn cost functions that will represent different objectives and put them together in the cost function. All right. In particular, in Sharework, or in this block as a perception block, I have used the density models as classifiers. Usually when we are doing classification, we use like the classical method to approach is to learn a discriminative model. So in a discriminative model basically does learn which is the boundary line that discriminates the space between the different classes that we have in our dataset. For example, here, each blue dot could represent a cat, or it could be an image of a cat, while the green dots could represent some features or some image of a dog. And what we are aiming to learn is a discriminative model that could discriminate between both classes. Nevertheless, if we use density models to classify, we have something more similar to the drawing in the right. What we are going to learn is actually the distribution of the demonstrations that we have. For example, if we have like the dog images of dog features, we are going to learn the distribution itself of the data, and the same for the cats. This provides a pretty interesting property if we are going to use it for classification. As we can see, if we now pick a point that is out of that is not the same of the examples and is pretty far from both, the discriminative model will always classify this point between this point belongs to cats or this point belongs to dogs. Nevertheless, if we do classification through generative models or through density models, what we will find is that if we pick a sample out of both distributions, our model could tell us things like, I don't know. So if we have an image of a horse, the density models based classifier will tell this does not belong neither to a dog, neither to a cat. Yet in the discriminative models, a horse is going to be rather classified as a dog or as a cat. So we can see that the density-based models methods are way more robust and can give us more information for real cases. Finally, and as a last example, we can use also the density models for data analysis. As we can see out here, we can, for example, learn the prediction of the forecast with respect to the temperature, the pressure, and so on. Or we could learn, for example, the density models of the population in a city or the prices of the houses. This information could be useful afterwards to take some decisions. All right. So I'm going to give a short introduction on how we have used these density models in the context of Sharework. In particular, I have trained a density model to classify between different gestures of the human. In human-robot interaction cases, we may be interested in understanding which are the motions that the human does. And in this direction, we aim to, it was to learn a data-efficient method that could allow us to detect if the gesture that the human is doing is a certain gesture. But additionally, we require also to encode the information that the human maybe sometimes is doing some gestures that are pure noise. And therefore, we need to classify them as noise. What we did was recording a bunch of different demonstrations, like both hands up, one hand up, and so on, and we learned a density model for each of the demonstrations by maximum likelihood estimation, as I have introduced. An important consideration is that if we have very few data, the features that we will consider may influence a lot in the solution. In our case, for example, we have considered the case of measuring absolute value points. So basically, we have like the 3D position of each link of the human. So we know the 3D position of the hand, the 3D position of the elbow, of the shoulder, and so on. And we also considered the relative positions, such as which is the angles that we have between the different links. And we studied to learn density models for the angle space and also for the absolute values. To classify between different tasks, we used to apply naive Bayes classification, in which here, this distribution, the likelihood, is actually the density model that we have learned. In the left, we show the confusion matrix that we obtain for the density model learned in the relative positions. And in the left, we have the confusion matrix for the ones that has been learned in the absolute values. And as we can observe, somehow expected, the solution that we obtain with the relative values is way more robust to different humans and different variations of sizes. So therefore, as a conclusion of this is that that is actually pretty important when you are learning a density model, which is the space or which are the features that you are considering to train this model. Additionally, just to finish, I want to give different cases in which that we have studied in different sections of Sharework. Like, for example, we can learn motion generators or policies that could encode, for example, stability. So here we can observe, for example, a stable vector field that moves to a target, and these can be afterwards used to maybe generating motions for like teaching the pulling task, and the robot should imitate the motion. Or as I will introduce in a different section of Sharework, we can also learn these probabilistic models, conditional probabilistic models that will predict where the human is going to be in the future, and this will be useful for trajectory optimization. With nothing else, oops, I missed to write thanks, but thanks so much to everybody, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Julien, for this very complete presentation. I think it has been very useful for researchers who need to know more about density estimation and models for robot motion generation. You gave a lot of information about functions, applications, which for sure will be interesting for others to review later as a recording or the presentation. So thank you very much. We have a question regarding Julien's work as a survey. If we can launch this.
Let me. Is it what it?
Yes. Now you can see it on the screen. The question is: if I do not care about the computation time and I have a massive amount of data, what would be the best density model to choose? And we have 4 options. So the Gaussian distribution, the Gaussian mixture model, kernel density model, or the normalizing flow. If you can vote, which one do you choose is the best model in that specific scenario? We'll leave a few seconds. but I think we have already a winning option because 65% says that it's the normalizing flow model. Can you comment?
Yeah, so it's actually a good choice, the normalizing flow, because it's highly expressive. But I guess that this question is also important to remark about the kernel density estimation. So the kernel density estimation actually scales to the amount of data that you have. So if you have like millions of data points, then your kernel density estimation is going to have millions of parameters, but it's going to be more expressive, even if computationally it's impossible to compute it. So in practice, yes, normalizing flows, but in theory, the kernel density estimation model probably is the best option.
Okay, so actually the kernel density model was the latest, so the less voted option with just 5% of people.
Because in practice, everybody will use normalizing flows, but the kernel density models is, yeah. I wanted also to have this question as an additional information to consider.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julian. We'll have you later at the questions and answers. We will launch the satisfaction survey regarding Julian's session, if you can please answer that. And in the meanwhile, we will move to the last presentation of this afternoon. We will have Nestor Garcia. Nestor, I will make you now presenter so you can share your slides. And you already know him from at the beginning of the session, but I think it's worth it to give a few more words about him. So Nestor is an industrial engineer and also holds a PhD degree in automatic control, robotics, and computer vision. And he's working right now as the principal investigator of the collaborative manipulation research group at EURECAT's robotic and automation unit. And he's the technical coordinator of Sharework project, which is the project that is organizing this training session today. And he will deliver a presentation about human tracking recognition and what has been done in that regard for a better human-robot collaboration. So Nestor, if you are ready, the floor is yours. I think we cannot hear you. Probably you are muted.
Sorry, my fault.
Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. Today I will present our work on how the robot can understand the task that the operator is performing in order to enhance the human-robot collaboration. So within my presentation, we'll start with the reviewing the state of the art. And I will then introduce the model we developed and its structure. I will then explain how we face the action recognition problem first as a model free estimation, and how we improve that estimation with a hidden Markov model correction. And I will end my speech with the ROS integration of the model and its outputs. So video action recognition has been evolving in the last 10 years in several directions, but there's still no clear front-running architecture. The several proposed approaches can be classified depending on how they deal with the temporal dimension. So it means how they combine the correlations between the spatial features and the temporal features. So in our case, our input tensor, it's one like this. So we have a video clip of color images of a given height and a given width. And we have an extra three dimension, which contains the number of frames of that video clip. So the first approach consists of using a pooling process in order to integrate that temporal dimension into the analysis of the images. So in this approach, each frame within temporal windows is processed independently to infer the depicted task, and then all the predictions for all the frames are merged afterwards to output a prediction of the whole video clip. So within this class, several approaches and several combination of approaches are included. Some examples are, for example, using a handcrafted feature representation plus dimensionality reduction in a traditional machine learning technique, followed by an average of all the predictions produced for each frame, which then outputs an estimation of the action shown in that video, and that will be a classical approach. But some other more advanced solutions can be used, like for example, using convolutional neural networks. In that case, a 2D convolutional neural network will be used to process all the frames, and then the estimations, the predictions of that neural network for all the frames can be pulled using a 1D convolutional neural network to output an estimation of the task shown in the video. Similar approaches take advantage from optical flows to provide temporal context. In the case, the pooling process is done for the inferences of a frame and the optical flow of the whole frame sequence. Also, to incorporate both the spatial and temporal behaviors, 2D convolutional networks can also be combined with long-short term memory cells. Spatial and temporal features can be also captured together with 3D convolutions. It means convolving a 3D kernel in stack multiple frame. Nevertheless, that approach has a high cost. And finally, in the last 5 years, transformers have been shown to be a powerful representation for sequential information, and that's the starting point of our approach. So knowing the task that the operator is performing is crucial for human-robot collaboration, because the robot and the worker must be in complete synchronization. So the model we developed addresses the interpretation of the data coming from multiple video streams, each coming from a different camera located in the scenario, showing a different point of view. And the model attempts to identify the task that the worker is performing. This information is provided to the task planner of the robot, so that the robot can reason and act, reason and plan which is the best task that the robot can be done, given the task that the human is performing, either to start a different task in a part to stop what the robot is doing and join the human in a collaborative task because the human needs help. So this is the structure of our model. So it processes the color video sequences with deep learning techniques to estimate the task that the worker is performing. We are only processing the videos coming from the best views, considering the current position of the human. This information is given by the human tracking model presented before by Maji. And just the best views are analyzed in parallel to fit the limited computational resources. After that, we execute a weighted pooling to produce a robust estimation of the human task using the information coming from the analyzed video sequences, but also the presence and lack of some task-related objects in the scene observed by the model presented by Niels. And we also use some use case task diagram flow. So as I explained, the human task is first estimated only considering the information coming from the color cameras. The architecture we are using is based on a ResNext backbone with an input of 3D convolutions, which allows for the temporal information to be stored in a third dimension in the form of clips of 64 frames. We are incorporating a bidirectional encoder representation from transformers, which at the end aggregates a self-attention mechanism into the prediction computation. So in this way, contextual information is fused from both direction, so in the natural temporal direction and in reverse, as a difference of other architectures like recurrent neural networks, which are only analyzing the video in a single direction. So for our application, we recorded different people performing different tasks from different perspectives. These tasks come from the Sharework use cases, and they are like either standing or sitting, moving around the scenario, picking, transporting, and placing objects, and some other tasks related to the use cases like applying adhesive, cleaning surfaces, screwing nuts, etc. So the training was performed with the dataset created. We had like 700 videos of 255 frames within the 11 tasks and homogeneously represented. The model took 13 hours to train over 200 epochs, reaching a plateau 70% of accuracy at top 1 and 97% at top 3. This is the confusion matrix. So you can see that it's almost diagonal, which is good. Sorry. And yeah, you can see that for the class 5, there's sometimes confusion, and it's predicted as class 0, which is placing object is sometimes confused with idle standing. So yeah, this could be improved handling better the labeling of the data set. So here are some examples. You can see here the 3 clips of 64 frames. And at the top left corner, you can see the ground truth for the video and the top 3 prediction of the neural net. In the real case, the prediction we have only the prediction after processing the 64 frames. But here we were seeing instantaneously the prediction. So you can see for the video that the correct prediction is always in the top 3. In this example, we see that we have the correct prediction in clips 2 and 3, but not for the first one. The first clip, temporal context, such as knowing which was the previous action, would help in correctly predicting the action. Some other behaviors we observed in the validation data set is that, for example, for this video, the model predicts at the beginning that the action is picking object, which is technically correct, but the label for the video is broadly enforced as clean surface. So in this case, some improvements could be done in our predictions. in order to improve and make more robust the predictions of the AI model, we model the problem as a hidden Markov model, where the task the human performs depends on the previous task. And for each task, some objects are more probable to be detected or not be detected. So in that case, we are using the following input. So we are using the top 3 prediction from the deep learning model. So the 3 most probable tasks that fit given the videos. The previous predicted action, so the last output of the prediction system. Also the objects detected in the scene provided by the environment cognition model. And the task transition priorities, which is the priority that of having the worker performing some task given the previously performed task. And also the object observation priority, which is the probability of detecting a given object in the scene when the worker is performing so a given task. So it means how related is an object to the task that the worker is performing. So it's important to note that the AI model is all the information contained in the given 64 frames. And this spatiotemporal context we are providing with the hidden Markov model helps the already time-aware model to include a more long-term time component. Also, the constructed sequence of tasks implies a Markovian change, with the one given task could only be done if some other task was previously done, for example. Also, the information on whether a tool is present or not in the workspace is a direct information we can wait in the final pooling, since, as I mentioned, there are some tasks which require some specific tools. And this explicit information provided from outside the model reduces the importance of the top 1 accuracy of the model. So it means having the correct prediction always on the top 1 prediction. And this allows for a more relaxed fit on the data set on purpose to avoid overfitting to the custom data set. So this is the final pipeline with the deep learning model and the final pooling in which we are providing this spatial temporal context. The pooling of these several inputs with the spatial temporal context, such as the tools detected in the scene, and also the last output of the deep learning model, is combined with the top 3 prediction of the AI model to produce the final prediction of the task recognition model. Seeking maximum versatility with encapsulated developed model in a single rows node. This node is subscribed to the topic of the RGB images of the cameras. So we are hardware agnostic regarding the camera used and then the number of cameras. We are also subscribed to the topic of the detected objects and the topic which contains the current worker location, in order to know which is the camera that it's currently offering the best point of view, and then which is the best video sequence to analyze given the limited computational power. This node automatically packs the images from each camera in clips of 64 frames and feeds them to the AI network. And after this special temporal context pooling is performed, a single prediction of the task being performed by the worker is published as a standard string message. we are reaching an accuracy of 80% of a frequency of 0.5 hertz. So we are producing an estimation every 2 seconds, which is the duration of the video clips we are feeding to the AI model. And yeah, it's important to note that some retraining of the neural network would be needed to optimize the model performance in the case of some unseen scenarios. Here you can see an example of the performance of the model. Here, as before, you can see the ground truth. The first prediction is the top one prediction of the AI model, and the second prediction is the one corrected with the inclusion of the spatio-temporal context. So in this case, the working is spread in silicon, and yeah, sometimes the raw prediction is not the correct one, and with the correction, the hidden Markov model correction, we are getting the ground truth. Like for example, in this case. And yeah, that was all from my side. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nestor, for this presentation, presenting some concepts on human task recognition. It's great to see how we have applied this to Sharework project and that we are having already some results, which a model that will be integrated in the Sharework modular system for a more safe and effective human-robot collaboration. We launched the last content survey of this afternoon based on Nestor's presentation. The question is the following: the proposed approach is based mainly on, you have three options, convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, or transformers. Which one do you think is the correct one? We don't have a clear answer yet. We have 30% in each one of the questions. We'll give a few more seconds to see if we have a winner option. Okay, it seems we have, with almost 50% of the respondents think that the correct one is recurrent neural networks. This would be the correct one or not, Nestor?
No, maybe I didn't explain it well. So our approach is based on transformers, and we are using a bidirectional encoding representation in order to analyze the video sequence in both temporal directions. But yeah, they are transformers.
Okay. Yeah, it happened the same with the last presentation. Transformer was the least voted option with 20%. So, well, we will be sharing the recording, we'll be sharing the materials in case you would like to review this to make sure you get the correct answer the next time. Okay, we can launch now the satisfaction survey for Nestor presentation. In the meanwhile, I will encourage participants, attendees to write their questions on the question box, as we will be now having the questions and answer session with all speakers that accompanied us today during this afternoon. That was quite intense training on perception techniques that can be applied to human-robot collaboration. Good. I think we can close the survey as we have almost everybody answering this. And I will invite everybody, all speakers, to activate their cameras to start the question and answer session. If you can join me here. Okay. So we can start these questions. We have received quite a few questions from our attendees. So I will start with those. And then if we have time, I will pose some questions from my side. So there are a couple. I will start with Niels. Yeah, he was presenting on object detection. And there are a couple of questions on regarding this presentation from Chakra Mehak. So the first question, Niels, is whether Octree is the same like batch extraction in image processing.
I'm not totally familiar with batch extraction, but as far as I've seen with the small search, it looks like you are pruning your image to smaller kernels. So it's similar, but you have to keep in mind that octrees also work on non-discrete data, and images always start at discrete data. So this means while it might seem comparable, it doesn't need to be necessarily comparable. And this also depends on how it is built up in the background. So if it should be similar to octrees for images, then it would be a quad tree representation, and there are also different representations for quad trees, for example, linear quad trees that are accelerated search times and so on. So there are different data types for different stuff.
Okay, thank you, Niels. Hopefully we have answered your question, Chakra. If not, maybe you can pose a follow-up question to Niels. We have also another question from Chakra for Niels, which is whether we really need to use benchmark data sets for training our models, or we can use our own data sets instead.
Yeah, of course not. So you could and you should always provide as many of real data or self-made data as you can, but usually the issue is that you cannot collect as many data as you need to provide your learning methods to abstract correctly to different use cases. So in the end, what often happens when you start out with machine learning is that you acquire a small data set for your use case, and then this completely overfits on your use case. So benchmark data sets are always good to more generalize on different data types because they mostly contain a very large database. So at the end, what you could also do, which I think I skipped a bit in the slides, is that you can combine artificial data and real data to get a more comprehensive data set in the end. So yeah, you can totally use your own data, of course.
Great, Niels. Before we move to the next presenter, I would also like to ask you a question regarding lining. So how does the lining scenario influence the object detection, and how we could do in that case?
So this was actually a pretty large issue when we started out in Sharework, that once the sun went down, also our image detection went down. So there are different color spaces that you can use in this case. So usually you have RGB or RGBA or CMY or something like this, which represents your colors. But there are also monochromatic color spaces like RG chromaticity, which you can use to only acquire specific color tones without the intensity. So at the base, lighting is just a color with a different intensity, and once you filter them out, you don't have those issues. But this also comes with another issue that, for example, if you put a light gray object on a deep gray object, then you convert it to those intensity independent color spaces, then they will also vanish. So you have to find a trade-off between using different color spaces, and then you can, by this, ignore lighting differences during the day.
Thank you very much, Niels. So we can move to the next. No, first, sorry, there is another question for you regarding if we can use vision transformers to extract spatial temporal features simultaneously, or maybe it's not for you and it's for Nestor in that case. If you can specify the attendee who posed that question.
If it is a question for me, I cannot answer it.
Okay, then we'll move to Maji, as he has received many questions. It seems that your presentation, Maji, was very interesting. And so I will...
Very messy, maybe.
We can go one by one, okay? So the first one, it's a question coming from Sergi Foch. And he's asking that, okay, that you presented that you use multiple RGB cameras. Which type of camera do you use? And if they are based in an-IR structured light, or how do you solve possible IR interferences?
Yes, we are using this kind of cameras. In fact, we are using for our test the Orbeck Astra Pro camera, just in particular this model. But yeah, we faced many problems with the cameras and so, but not this problem with interferences. I think that maybe because of the layout of the testing scenario with in which the cameras are separated and there are many objects that maybe occlude this interference, but I'm not sure how we will address this issue, because yeah, we didn't have this problem, at least with these cameras.
Thank you. Then we have a couple of questions that are kind of related. One from Steve Edent, who says if your approach works well in real time, and the other one related to that is what frames per second do you achieve with your approach?
Yeah, we are using CPU and GPU. I think that the question also was mentioning which GPU are
yes,
using.
he's mentioning. I can
so
read the
we are
whole
using both. No, it's okay. Both GPUs that are used are NVIDIA RTX 3060. So yeah, you can just search for exactly the performance of this kind of GPUs. But yeah, it is working well in real time, at least for our requirements, since it is working at 15 Hertz. Almost 15 Hertz, between 40 and 15 Hertz. So yeah, it's enough for us to work okay with real time. Yeah.
Okay, and then I think we have a final third one for you by Marta Lagomarsino. She thanks you for the nice presentation and asks whether you have already published this work.
Yeah, we didn't publish yet this work. We are pending to review all the outputs of the project and to decide what will be the outcomes, if we will publish the software or maybe we will make a scientific publication, but it is not yet decided for our side. So yeah, keep in touch.
Yeah, I wanted to add here that any scientific publication coming out from Sharework project can be found on the project website. We have a specific page under results, which is called scientific publications, obviously, and there you can find all the scientific publications related to the project, some of them related to concepts that were presented today, such as, for example, the ontological approach that was presented by Andrea Brandini at the beginning of this session, and many other. You can also find publications on primitives learning and other concepts. So I encourage you to have a look at that. Okay, Maji, so I think this was all for you. We have a question for Nestor from the audience, as the attendee confirmed that it was a question for you. The question, I can read this again, is how we use vision transformers to extract spatial temporal features simultaneously?
Yes. So the thing is that we are processing all the images together, and we are encoding in those images its temporal location within the video frame, and we are using some pre-trained transformer model used for detecting some other task not related with the industrial scenario, like walking or reading and so on. And we taking this pre-trained weight, we train this already published architecture to allow the model to learn these new tasks.
A follow-up question for you, Nestor, is if this really works for both features or just in case of temporal features?
Both features, you mean special? Yeah, it's working. Yeah. So we are reaching a top one accuracy of 70% with the raw AI prediction, and with the spatial temporal correction we are applying afterwards, we are reaching 90% of accuracy, the top one prediction. So it's working.
Thank you, Nestor, for the explanation. If I may, I would also like to pose a question for you regarding, so what's the weight in the prediction of the estimation of the network and the spatiotemporal context?
Yeah, so we could say that the AI model is responsible of 80 or 90% of the final prediction, and the correction we are applying afterwards, it's applying correction in those 20% of the cases, which is in which the AI model is failing to predict the action the human is performing.
Okay, thank you, Nestor. Now we can move to Julian. We don't have any specific questions from the audience for you, but I have a couple. So the first one would be, so does the proposed classifier that you presented in your presentation perform better than a regular one, and how you can assess that it performs better?
Yeah, so basically it was what I was trying to explain during the presentation, is that so a regular classifier tries to put boundaries between the different classes, yet here what we are trying to do is we are learning directly the density distribution of the data that we have for each class. So therefore, like in a classical discriminative model, if you have a sample that is out of the demonstrations, is going to be classified as some of the classes. Yet here, just by learning the density models, we can assess that the probability of this sample with respect to all the classes is very low. So in theory, we can represent when the sample is not from any class, that it makes it more robust to noise, for example. Yeah.
Okay. And if the data we are using is the same, why does the chosen input variables influence in the performance of the classifier?
With respect to the absolute and the relative ones, I guess that you get like the most important thing when you're learning a model is the features will directly influence in the generalization of the model. So if we want to extrapolate to different bodies, different shapes, and different heights, and so on, it's somehow important to figure out which is going to be the proper feature. And in this case, like the relative poses may influence in the extrapolation properties for the model. So it's very important to consider it. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much, Julian, for your explanations. We can move to the first presenter that we have today, Andrea Orlandini. I have not forgot about you. We don't have any questions from the audience. If any attendee has a question for Andrea, please, now it's the time to ask him. There are no silly questions, so anything that you may have been wondering during his presentation, you can write it on the question box. I can ask a question to you related to, so which is the main barrier for deploying this technology in concrete robotic cells?
Okay, thanks for the question. And let's say that the main barrier basically is related to the difficulty in translating all the information that is that are gathered through the robotic cells. So the information about the robots, the process, the sensors present in the cells, the work pieces to be elaborated, and whatever. This is a lot of data that needs to be encoded in the ontology schema, and then this data should be provided as an input to be encoded basically in some way that could be a manual way, but of course is not really sustainable, because you need to describe a lot of things, a lot of different things in some way. And so the main barrier is to simplify this acquisition of knowledge. And in this sense, we are also working in developing some tools that facilitates the acquisition of knowledge directly from the data repository that are already present in the industries. For instance, describing the productions or describing the products, the description of the expertise of the human operators. So in some sense, there is a need for having tools that facilitates also the feed, the input feed of this very big knowledge base. Mm-hmm. And I would say that this is the main issue that currently is still there, and in some sense leads to complex deployment in a sense.
Okay, Andrea. Actually, we have a question for you from a speaker. Just a last-minute question. He wanted to address the question to you, but I think that it's a question for all speakers today, because it's a very broad question. And the question is, do you think that human-robot collaboration is really applicable in industry? What do you think? Maybe you can take the lead, Andrea, and somebody else can comment on their thoughts of whether it's applicable right now, or still we have a way to go.
Okay, I give a very short answer. Let's say that in this moment is applicable, but maybe it's not so effective. So in some sense, the amount of work needed in order to deploy a fully autonomous robotic cell is still too much to make it sustainable. So in a sense, a pilot or a concrete real case requires a lot of work, a lot of additional work with respect to the classical approach. In some cases, and this is most of the use cases in Sharework, are actually requiring a very high level of flexibility in the solution. In that cases, the application is actually more effective and more useful, because the amount of work needed in order to apply also the classical approaches are very complex, are very demanding in time of human effort in setting things, setting control, and one little modification in the production process requires to review all the control solutions, all the procedures, and whatever you need in order to have the working cell, the robotic cell working. So the more flexibility you need, and the more actual human-robot collaboration is effective.
Also, there are some barriers which are preventing the real implementation of this collaborative solution into real scenarios, which are, for example, some certification regarding safety.
Yes, regarding barriers, we have also another question asking whether industry should remodel their business activities to adopt human-robot collaboration, like including, for example, safety system, productivity, operator training, etc. If somebody wants to comment on that.
Yeah, so with the, as Andrea was commenting, having a collaborative workstation in the factory allows for adapt to a flexible, demanding market, and having adapt your productivity to the demand of the market. Yeah.
And while we are now reflecting on the produce side of our process, there's also always a human in the loop. You have to keep in mind that human-robot collaboration at all allows, for example, disabled people who are at the base not able to perform the work, or elderly people who degrade over time, to really do the job and fulfill their job for longer times. And this is what really makes the benefit of human-robot collaboration, not helping the worker who at all can do it on its own. Yeah, it's still reducing the tedious work, so the repetitiveness of the work and so on. But at the base, human-robot collaboration allows people who were originally not able to perform the processes to really be included in the normal work life, and therefore also be included in the social in the social group of your company. And therefore this fulfills a much higher meaning than just including workers. And this is what also companies should look at, and possibly also need to understand by the work that we are doing, and especially that we are, as Aachen University, are doing at our institute, where we try to basically include disabled people into work processes.
Thank you very much, all of you. I think we have to close the questions and answer session. We have more questions coming in, but we really don't have time. So I encourage people asking these questions to contact us at through our general email that I will now write on the chat, which is info@shareworkproject.eu, and we will be gladly helping you with those information that you are asking about. And if you would like to contact any of our speakers today personally regarding specific matters of your projects, because I'm reading that several people says, thank you very much for the presentation, it's great for my project, etc. So if you want to contact our speakers, also you can write to us in the general email, and we can put you through them to discuss further on specific matters. All said, I think we need to close now. We will also like to inform you about the rest of our activities, as this was the first training webinar for Sharework project, but we are organizing many more. So if you liked and found interesting this one, you can register also for the next one. Here on the screen you can see the calendar. So in the 5th of May, within a month, we are having another event on focusing on human factors, which is something Niels also right now was mentioning as key for an effective implementation of human-robot collaboration. And in this activity, we'll be presenting how we can develop a more human-centric design for the factories of the future. And we will include presentations regarding ergonomic and posture assessments, methodologies to ensure acceptance from workers of these new collaborative systems, collaborative robotic solutions, how we can use augmented reality for operator training, as well as many other, I think, interesting topics. So if you would like to join, you can find the registration form open at Sharework website. You can already register, and we would really like to find you there as well in our next sessions. Apart from human factors, we are going to touch on phase safety and security, motion planning, and ending in July with this series of training activities on human-robot collaboration implementation in industrial shop floors, where we are going to present we are going to present the 4 Sharework case studies and how we are implementing a Sharework solution into 4 companies in Europe. Okay, so this would be it for today. Just to finally thank all the speakers from CNR, from the Aachen University, for the Technical University of Darmstadt, and EURECAT for these very interesting presentations today. I think that people has enjoyed them a lot as much as I did, and were very complete and very useful for fellow researchers and also people professionals in the robotics industry. In general, what I have seen from the satisfaction surveys that were launched in between presentation, most of the people were very satisfied with the presentations and found them useful. So thanks to you for preparing these contents. And I wanted to also thank a few colleagues from my communication department, Marina Sanchez, Ivan Garcia, to be there and support in this, to make sure that this webinar was a success technically and in the organizational form. If you would like to know more about Sharework, you can find everything in our website, which is shareworkproject.eu. And yes, this would be all for today. I hope you had enjoyed, and we can see you all in the next training session. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.